Just last month, Beijing dropped a bombshell, a full suspension of all seafood imports from Japan. Overnight, this wasn't just news, it was a crisis for Japanese fishermen and exporters. Orders that had been months in the making were suddenly canceled, shipments that had crossed oceans returned to ports, and forecasts estimate that Japan could lose more than $500 million in potential sales over the next year. For a country whose seafood industry has long been associated with precision, quality, and tradition, this was nothing short of a shock. Imagine a fisherman in Hokkaido who carefully tended to his scallops or sea urchins, suddenly finding that the entire Chinese market, one of his biggest buyers, is closed. The worry isn't abstract, it's personal, immediate, and existential. And then, as often happens in global markets, one country's loss becomes another's potential gain. India's seafood exporters suddenly saw a chance to step in, a moment to claim a share of a market that had long been dominated by Japan. Some were even popping champagne at the prospect. But here's the catch. This isn't just a simple swap. Japan's seafood is considered premium, associated with freshness, origin, and quality. India produces mainly frozen shrimp for mass consumption. The products, the logistics, the consumer expectations, they're worlds apart. So, the central question emerges. Can India realistically replace Japan in China's high-end seafood market, or is this golden opportunity more complicated than it seems? This isn't just about seafood, it's about trade influence, global market access, and the invisible power dynamics of international economics. By the end of this video, we'll explore why timing alone doesn't guarantee success, and why even a seemingly perfect opportunity can be blocked by factors no exporter can control. Let's step back and look at India, a country that many people might not immediately think of when it comes to seafood. But India's coastline stretches over 7,500 kilometers, hugging the Arabian Sea to the west and the Bay of Bengal to the east. That's a lot of shoreline, and a lot of opportunity. The tropical waters here are warm, nutrient-rich, and biodiverse, which means fish and shrimp grow quickly, and there's a huge variety of species to harvest. Think of it like a natural seafood factory. The climate and the seas do most of the work, while the long coastline gives easy access for fishing boats and exports. And it's not just about catching fish. India sits near some of the world's most important shipping lanes. Exporting seafood from India is cheaper and faster compared to landlocked producers or those far from major ports. The Indian government has also been actively building this advantage. Over the past decade, it has invested in fisheries bases, aquaculture farms, cold chain logistics, and processing factories, while providing subsidies and tax incentives for exporters. These measures make it easier for Indian seafood to reach international markets while staying fresh. The numbers speak for themselves. In 2024, India exported around 1.7 million tons of seafood valued at $7.4 billion. Its biggest markets include the United States, the European Union, and China. Among all products, shrimp is king, especially white-leg shrimp, which accounts for roughly 70% of total export value. These shrimp travel thousands of kilometers, often reaching the United States in about 25 days, proving India's logistical capabilities. Yet, despite all these natural and structural advantages, India still faces a big challenge: high-end seafood markets. While India can supply large volumes of shrimp efficiently, it hasn't developed the same reputation for premium, fresh, or sushi-grade seafood that Japan enjoys. That gap will become critical when we examine India's opportunity in China. Now that we understand India's seafood potential, it's time to see why this potential faces serious obstacles, starting with the United States. For years, the United States has been India's largest seafood market, buying about 35% of all Indian exports, especially shrimp. But things changed dramatically during the Trump era. The United States imposed massive tariffs on Indian goods, reaching up to 50%, specifically targeting labor-intensive, low-value-added industries, including seafood. Imagine running a business where suddenly your main customer doubles the price you have to charge. Naturally, American buyers canceled orders. Many processing plants had to shut down, and export volumes began to drop sharply. In October 2024 alone, Indian seafood exports to the United States fell by 9% year-on-year. For an industry that supports millions of jobs, that's a major shockwave. The ripple effect went far beyond just exports. It hit fishermen, aquaculture farmers, processing facilities, cold chain transport, and packaging companies. Every step in the supply chain felt the pinch. Frozen shrimp, the cornerstone of India's seafood industry, was among the hardest hit, and major United States retailers like Walmart had to look elsewhere for supply. Faced with such a dramatic loss, India's government moved quickly, approving a $5 billion relief package for affected export industries. But while this helps in the short term, it's not a long-term solution. Subsidies can't replace real market access, stable demand, or competitive advantages. The key takeaway here is simple. India desperately needs alternative markets. Its enormous seafood production is ready to go, but if it can't sell, the entire industry risks collapse. This sets the stage for India's pivot toward China, where a sudden opening might appear. But as we'll see, the situation is far more complicated than it seems. With the United States market largely closed off by heavy tariffs, India naturally turned its eyes toward China, the world's second-largest seafood importer and home to 1.44 billion consumers. In 2024 alone, China imported about $18 billion worth of seafood, a staggering figure that shows how hungry the market is. Then came the twist. In November 2025, China suddenly banned all seafood imports from Japan. This move left a huge gap in the market, especially for mid to high-end products like scallops, sea cucumbers, and tuna, items Chinese consumers associate with Japanese quality. Overnight, millions of dollars worth of Japanese seafood were returned or canceled, creating a sudden vacuum. For India, this felt like a golden opportunity. Exporters began dreaming. Could this be the moment to finally break into China's lucrative seafood market and make up for the losses caused by United States tariffs? With Japanese competitors out of the picture, there was a window, albeit a narrow one, for India to expand exports and establish a foothold in Asia's seafood trade. But here's where the tension builds. Opportunity does not always equal readiness. India's seafood industry, while strong in volume and shrimp production, faces challenges in product type, quality standards, and consumer expectations. The question now becomes, can India realistically compete with Japan's high-end offerings in China, or is this gap more complicated than it looks? This moment is critical. It's the point where hope meets reality, setting the stage for the next section, examining why India cannot simply replace Japan in the Chinese market. At first glance, India's seafood industry seemed ready to swoop in and fill the gap left by Japan. But the reality is far more complicated. The key issue? Well, it really comes down to product categories and consumer expectations. Japan exports high-end seafood, such as scallops, sea cucumbers, and bluefin tuna from Hokkaido. These are often eaten raw as sashimi, which means freshness, origin, and hygiene are paramount. Chinese consumers, especially those who frequent high-end restaurants or enjoy premium home dining, have developed a taste for Japanese quality, trusting it implicitly. India, on the other hand, primarily exports frozen shrimp, particularly white-leg shrimp, aimed at mass consumption in supermarkets and wet markets. These products are designed for volume, not premium quality. Indian seafood often comes from small and medium-sized farms, which account for about 70% of production. Many of these farms struggle with sanitation, water treatment, and cold chain logistics, leading to spoilage rates as high as 35% during transport. This creates a mismatch. India's frozen shrimp simply cannot substitute for Japanese high-end seafood. Even if Indian exporters could ship larger quantities, the Chinese high-end market values freshness, origin, and traceability over volume or price. In short, while the timing seemed perfect, India's products were not in the same league as Japan's offerings. The market gap existed on paper, but product fit, quality standards, and consumer expectations created an invisible barrier India could not easily overcome. This sets up the next challenge. India must also contend with China's massive domestic seafood production, which adds another layer of competition and complexity. Even if India could somehow bridge the quality gap for high-end seafood, there's another formidable obstacle: China's own domestic production. China isn't just a huge seafood consumer, it's also the world's largest aquaculture producer, particularly for white-leg shrimp, the very product India relies on for exports. In coastal regions like Hainan, Shandong, and across the eastern seaboard, China has developed industrial-scale shrimp farms with standardized, highly automated production systems. Annual output exceeds 1.6 million tons, accounting for 38% of global shrimp production. These farms operate at low cost, with consistent quality and reliable supply, making them extremely difficult for foreign exporters to compete against on price or availability. India's challenges are compounded by past regulatory issues. In 2022, 35 Indian seafood companies were suspended from exporting to China due to hygiene violations. Many small and medium farms in India cannot afford the infrastructure needed for proper water purification, sanitation, and cold chain management, which raises the risk of product rejection. So even if Indian exporters were confident in their products, they now face a two-front battle, competing with premium Japanese seafood on quality and freshness, and simultaneously competing with China's domestic shrimp supply on cost, volume, and reliability. This double challenge makes entering the Chinese market far more complicated than simply filling a temporary gap. And just as India hopes to gain traction, another foreign competitor is stepping in to take the opportunity India was chasing. Just as India was preparing to step into the vacuum left by Japan, China made a surprising move. It opened the door to Spain as a new seafood supplier. On November 27, 2025, China's General Administration of Customs announced that eligible Spanish farmed aquatic products could immediately enter the Chinese market. This decision didn't just happen randomly. Spain has several advantages that make it an ideal replacement for Japan's high-end seafood. First, Spain is renowned for premium seafood, particularly bluefin tuna from the North Atlantic and Mediterranean. Spanish fishers use an ancient trap net method called almadraba, which preserves the tuna's delicate texture, rich fat content, and deep red color, qualities highly prized by sushi chefs worldwide, including in China. Beyond tuna, Spain also produces high-quality salmon, grouper, oysters, and farmed shrimp, all ready for export. Second, as an EU member, Spain offers reliable cold chain logistics, standardized safety controls, and strict quality supervision. Chinese consumers, especially those buying high-end seafood, place enormous trust in European standards, making Spain a natural substitute for Japan in the premium market. The early results are already visible. In the first 10 months of 2025, seafood imports from Spain through Shenzhen port reached 100 million renminbi, a 47.3% year-on-year growth, and the newly approved product categories suggest that Spain's seafood exports to China will continue expanding rapidly. For India, this development is a reality check. The opportunity they had hoped to seize is being filled by a competitor with stronger quality credentials, trusted logistics, and established trade frameworks. Even with India's production capacity and natural advantages, Spain has taken the high-end market lead that India cannot match, leaving India to focus on more volume-based, lower-cost segments, which are already dominated by China's own domestic supply. India's window in China is not just shrinking, it's closing fast, highlighting that in global trade, timing alone isn't enough. Product fit, quality, and trust are decisive. So, what can we take away from this story? India's seafood industry is huge, strategically located, and backed by government support. Its coastline, tropical waters, and growing export infrastructure make it a natural seafood powerhouse. But when it comes to stepping into the Chinese market, potential alone isn't enough. The sequence of events shows us a layered reality. U.S. tariffs cut off a major export market, forcing India to look for alternatives. Japan's sudden ban on exports to China seemed like a golden opportunity, but in practice, India faced insurmountable challenges. The products it exports, mainly frozen shrimp, are not suitable for high-end Chinese consumption. Small-scale farms struggle with sanitation, cold chain, and quality control, and domestic Chinese production already satisfies much of the low to mid-range market. Meanwhile, Spain swooped in with premium seafood, trusted logistics, and established trade standards, quickly filling the gap Japan left behind. For India, this underscores a critical lesson. Market openings are about more than timing. They require product quality, reliability, and regulatory compliance. In other words, opportunity doesn't automatically translate into success. Even when a sudden gap appears in a massive market like China, capability, standards, and consumer trust ultimately decide who benefits. And here's the broader takeaway. Global trade is a complex chessboard. Countries and companies can't rely on luck. They must invest in infrastructure, quality, and compliance to turn opportunity into sustainable growth. So, the next time you see headlines about bans, tariffs, or sudden market shifts, remember, these events are more than news. They reveal the invisible forces shaping global economics, supply chains, and competition. If you want to keep following how trade policies, production capabilities, and international markets quietly reshape global power, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. The story of seafood is just one example. Next time, the battleground could be anything from rare minerals to high-tech components, quietly determining who controls the markets of tomorrow.